It wasn't a rumor this time. It wasn't a headline built on whispers. Insiders claim Meghan collapsed the moment the DNA test results were confirmed, because the truth about Lilibet wasn't just shocking, it was destabilizing. The kind of truth that doesn't only change a family story, it changes a royal timeline. And what makes this terrifying is that the test didn't raise questions. It allegedly answered them finally, brutally, and in a way nobody inside the palace was prepared to handle. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. People around Meghan reportedly didn't describe it as a dramatic moment for attention. They described it as something raw, involuntary, and frightening, like her body reacted before her mind could even catch up. The kind of collapse that doesn't happen from stress alone, but from impact, from realization, from a single sentence on a document that makes your breath disappear. And if that's true, then the question becomes unavoidable. What did she see in those results that hit so hard it shattered her in real time? Because this wasn't supposed to be confirmed. For years, the story lived inside a fog of privacy, suspicion, and carefully worded distance. Every time the topic drifted too close, it was pushed away with the same shield: leave the children out of it. Stop speculating. Respect boundaries. But insiders now claim the palace reached a point where boundaries weren't enough. Because a royal institution doesn't run on feelings alone. It runs on lineage, precedent, and the quiet machinery of legitimacy. And Lilibet's identity, they say, isn't just a family matter, it's tied to titles, history, and the long unforgiving memory of the crown. That's why the alleged response from inside the palace wasn't grief first. It was containment. Silence. Urgency. A sudden burst of calls that didn't go through secretaries. Meetings that weren't on calendars. Doors that didn't open for staff who normally glide in and out without being noticed. If this story is true, then it didn't land like gossip, it landed like an emergency. The kind that forces people to speak in clipped sentences and make decisions that feel cruel, but necessary. Because once something becomes official, it can no longer be managed with public statements. It has to be managed with strategy. And then there's Harry. This is where the whispers turn darker. Because some claim his reaction wasn't clean anger or clear denial. It was shock, mixed with panic, like the floor beneath his certainty cracked, and he didn't know which side to stand on anymore. Imagine the horror of realizing you might have defended a version of the truth without ever knowing if it was solid. Imagine feeling the world watching your child's name, your child's place, your child's legitimacy, while you're still trying to understand what you've been told behind closed doors. If he truly didn't know what to believe, then this wasn't only betrayal from the outside. It was betrayal inside his own mind. And here's the part that makes this feel like a story the palace feared for years. The idea that the truth wasn't a sudden accident. It was something people sensed. Something that lingered beneath polite smiles and formal distance. Something that made certain conversations end too quickly. Insiders claim those whispers existed long before any test was ordered. But they were buried under privacy. Because privacy is the perfect grave for suspicion. It doesn't prove anything. It just keeps everything quiet long enough for people to move on. Until they don't. Because if the dinner test truly answered something, then it wasn't a small detail. It wasn't a minor correction. It was something that retilts the entire narrative people thought they understood. And that's why the most chilling question isn't what the results said, it's what forced the palace to take the risk of asking in the first place. But to understand how it even reached the point of a DNA test, we have to go back to the quiet suspicions that the palace allegedly tried to dismiss until they became impossible to ignore. Insiders claim the palace didn't want a DNA test because tests create records, and records create consequences. For years, the story allegedly kept resurfacing not as a loud public conspiracy, but as a private unease inside the system. Small contradictions, awkward questions that never fully went away, At first, it could be dismissed as cruelty and obsession from the outside. But behind closed doors, some say it hardened into something colder. Fear that if whispers ever became formal doubt, the monarchy would be dragged into a legitimacy storm it could not choreograph. And that's the part people rarely understand about the institution. It doesn't panic because of rumors. It panics because of repetition. Because repeated rumors become known, and what becomes known starts to shape perception, policy, and future claims. So, according to insiders, aides didn't chase the truth like gossip hunters, they tracked the damage like risk managers. Not to prove anything, but to predict what would happen if a narrative caught fire at the wrong moment. Their instinct, they say, was always the same: avoid proof, avoid paperwork, avoid legal triggers. Because once something is documented, it becomes a weapon for someone else to use later. But then comes the twist insiders keep circling back to. The Dina test allegedly didn't happen because the palace was curious it happened, because the palace was afraid. Afraid of exposure that could surface in a future reign. Afraid of succession optics. Afraid of a crisis detonating years later, when there would be no time to contain it. And that's why the identity of the person who pushed for verification matters so much. Because whoever pressed for it wasn't chasing drama. They were allegedly trying to stop a bomb from going off when the next chapter of the monarchy begins. Sources suggest there were attempts to avoid this moment: quiet checks, private assurances, careful conversations designed to settle nerves without creating evidence. But something, they claim, changed. A single new piece of information. A detail that wasn't supposed to exist. And suddenly the questions weren't just embarrassing, they were a security issue. Because if doubt became leverage, it could be used to fracture the family, blackmail the institution, or poison public confidence at the worst possible time. In that atmosphere, protection stops sounding gentle. It becomes pressure. It becomes corners closing in. And if this version is true, then even Harry may not have fully understood what the test was really about until it was already in motion, until he realized the palace wasn't trying to satisfy curiosity, it was trying to secure a future. Meanwhile, insiders claim Meghan felt trapped, not by the public, but by the machine itself, an institution that doesn't argue with emotion. It simply moves forward, politely, relentlessly, toward the outcome it wants. Because when the results arrived, they didn't just confirm a truth, they revealed a fracture that threatened to split Harry's world in two. Insiders describe the results as the kind of truth that doesn't simply clarify. It redefines. It forces everyone to revisit every moment, every statement, every carefully managed image, because the shocking part, they claim, isn't that the results caused confusion, it's that they allegedly produced certainty where the palace expected ambiguity. And once certainty exists, it becomes dangerous. Dangerous to reputations, dangerous to legacy. Dangerous to the fragile agreement the monarchy relies on, that the public will believe what it is told, as long as what it is told feels stable. Suddenly, it didn't feel stable anymore, and the language inside the walls reportedly turned sharp and urgent: contain. Protect. Do not leak. Because if the truth was identity-altering, not cosmetic, then it wasn't about one headline or one public argument. It was about lineage, documentation, and biological connection, about the kind of details that don't disappear just because people wish them away. And when you're dealing with an institution built on records, a record that contradicts the public narrative isn't a problem. It's a threat. A threat to legitimacy, stories whispered in drawing rooms and shouted on screens. A threat to private trust inside a family already cracked by suspicion. A threat that makes people stop asking what do we feel and start asking what can we prove and what can destroy us. That's why Meghan's alleged collapse is described not as performance, but as a psychological breaking point, like the weight of certainty landed on her chest and didn't let go. Insiders suggest it wasn't the fear of being judged by strangers that broke her. It was the fear of what would happen next, once too many important people held the same piece of paper, the same sealed conclusion, the same irreversible reality. Because once a truth becomes shared inside the palace, it stops being personal. It becomes institutional. And institutions don't keep secrets out of compassion. They keep secrets out of strategy until strategy changes. But the most brutal collision, they say, happened in Harry. Insiders claim he didn't respond like a prince. He responded like a father whose reality was collapsing, because no matter what the test said, Lilibet was still his child in every way that matters emotionally. Yet the monarchy doesn't operate on emotion. It operates on legitimacy, optics, and the public story that holds it together. And that is where the pain allegedly became unbearable. Harry caught between protecting his daughter's identity story and protecting her from becoming the center of a global scandal she never asked for. Sources suggest his trust in Meghan may have shaken, not necessarily from hatred, but from the terrifying possibility that secrets were kept for survival. And survival has a way of turning love into quiet deception. They hint at a private confrontation after the collapse, voices low, questions sharper than either of them expected. The kind of conversation where the silence between words hurts more than the words themselves. And hanging over everything was the same question: did Harry reach out to the palace for help or for answers? Because those are not the same thing, and the wrong choice can change everything. What makes this darker is that the results didn't just implicate Meghan. Insiders tease that they raised questions about the people around her who knew what, who helped shape the narrative, and who might have benefited from keeping certain details blurred. And the deeper that implication goes, the harder it becomes to bury, because too many hands end up touching the truth. Too many minds begin calculating risk. Too many voices begin asking, what do we do with this now? And once the palace even considered redefining anything connected to a child, the crisis escalated beyond family drama, because it became about the monarchy's moral line and legal limits. But while Harry wrestled with heartbreak, the palace moved with cold precision, because the institution doesn't wait for emotions to settle before it protects itself. Insiders claim the palace entered full crisis mode the moment the truth was confirmed. Not public statements, not sympathy. Strategy. Lawyers, courtiers, and senior advisors allegedly tightened the circle so fast it felt like the air changed. Restricted access, sealed briefings, controlled communications, and one chilling instruction repeated like a prayer: do not leak. Because if this truth ever becomes public, the monarchy doesn't just face headlines. It faces a legitimacy question that could echo for generations, staining not only reputations, but the very idea that the institution can be trusted to tell the public what is real. And that's where the cold machinery begins. Sources describe it as a containment operation with multiple tracks running at once: legal risk on one side, public narrative on the other, and family management threaded through both like a fragile wire. What could be challenged? What could be claimed? What could be weaponized later? Those questions don't sound like family support. They sound like institutional defense. Because the palace instinct, insiders say, is never to solve a scandal. It's to prevent a scandal from becoming a precedent, something that invites future pressure, future demands, future doubt. But the most brutal part of this story is that a child becomes the battlefield. Inside the system, insiders claim, two instincts collided with frightening force. One camp argued for compassion, protect Lilibet from becoming collateral damage, because public cruelty toward a child is a stain no palace statement can wash away. The other camp argued the opposite, protect the crown at any cost, because the crown cannot survive public doubt about what it presents as truth. And once those two instincts clash, the monarchy faces its darkest question: how do you protect innocence inside an institution built on legacy and control? That's when whispers of a silent rewrite allegedly began. Not a dramatic announcement, not a headline-grabbing correction, something quieter. Changes in protocol language, subtle shifts in how status is described, future visibility adjusted without explanation. a slow, deliberate reshaping designed to make the public accept a new reality without ever seeing the hands that built it. And hovering over that idea is an even darker possibility. If stability becomes the goal, someone has to carry the blame. Insiders tease that Meghan could be positioned as the problem that must be contained, the story that must be isolated because scapegoats are often easier than admissions. Yet there are hints too of internal disagreements that cut deeper than policy. Some sources suggest Catherine's camp, those who focus on the long game of public trust, pushes hardest for shielding all the children involved from exposure, fearing history will judge the adults but punish the innocent. Others, insiders claim, see compassion as weakness, a luxury the institution can't afford when the stakes are survival. And in that tension, a new danger grows. The truth doesn't just threaten the palace from the outside. It becomes a weapon inside the walls. Because whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. Because public opinion, once ignited, doesn't burn evenly. It swings violently. One day it demands justice. The next it demands blood. And insiders warn that both camps understand the same terrifying fact. If this story breaks in the wrong frame, the backlash could be merciless, especially toward Meghan, and devastatingly, toward the child at the center of it all. That is why the fear of leaks is so intense, not because the palace loves secrecy for its own sake, but because secrecy is the only thing that still gives them time to choose a shape for the story. And then comes the cliff edge. Insiders claim a document is drafted something that would permanently change what the public believes, not by loudly rewriting history, but by quietly redirecting it. And at the same time, another rumor slips through the cracks. Someone threatens to leak the truth first on their terms, with their framing and with their chosen villain. And if someone leaks first, the palace will lose the only thing it still controls: the timing, the framing, and the illusion of calm. Insiders claim the Dina truth doesn't end with one collapse, it begins a new era of fracture. Because once legitimacy is questioned, it doesn't stay in one corner of the story. It spreads through everything. Titles start feeling heavier, trust starts feeling thinner, media turns from curiosity into obsession, and even the way history is written becomes a battlefield, because history doesn't remember emotions, it remembers facts. And whoever controls the facts controls the legacy. That's why the chilling reality isn't just what the test allegedly revealed, it's what it infects afterward. The monarchy can survive scandal. It has survived scandal before. But insiders say it cannot survive permanent doubt about what it asks the public to believe. And even if the palace buries the details, the relationships won't recover the same way. Because secrets don't only hide truth, they change how people look at each other. Every conversation becomes filtered. Every reassurance sounds rehearsed. Every silence feels loaded. Insiders suggest this is why the damage becomes long-term, not temporary shock. Once a family starts measuring each other by paperwork and precedent, affection stops being simple. Loyalty stops being automatic. And the people involved don't just move on, they reposition, because survival becomes the new currency. That's where Harry and Meghan's position allegedly becomes permanently altered. Not in a dramatic overnight exile, but in something quieter and more brutal distance. Isolation. Forced negotiation. Sources claim they may be pushed into choices they never imagined making, cooperate to protect their daughter's future, or resist and risk letting the story grow teeth. And if Harry already felt torn between love and institution, this turns that conflict into a life sentence. Because the palace doesn't need to punish someone loudly to defeat them. Sometimes it simply waits, changes the weather around them, and lets the world interpret the silence as guilt. But the deepest tragedy in this story, insiders whisper, is Lilibet. Because whatever the adults did, whatever the palace decided, whatever the test proved or didn't prove, she's the one who grows up under a shadow she didn't create. Imagine becoming old enough to understand your own name, only to learn it carries rumors like bruises. Imagine seeing strangers argue about your identity as if your life is a courtroom. And imagine the cruel irony. The child may be the only truly innocent person in the entire storm, yet she becomes the symbol everyone fights over. Insiders also tease that the palace may not act immediately, not openly. Instead, the real move could be a future change delivered slowly, tiny shifts over time that rewrite reality without ever admitting a rewrite happened. A protocol adjustment here, a wording change there, a visibility decision that seems normal until you realize it's consistent. And then comes the next major royal event, because that's when unity is tested and narrative control becomes survival. Who stands where? Who is mentioned? Who is welcomed? Who is protected? Who is quietly kept out of sight? The world will read the smallest details like they are confessions. And behind all of it, insiders warn, the truth becomes leverage. Not always spoken, not always threatened, but held like a weapon in a locked drawer, ready for the moment someone needs power. Because once information can damage an institution, it becomes currency, and currency gets spent. Sometimes for protection, sometimes for revenge, sometimes simply because someone believes they're saving the crown by destroying the people caught in its path. That's why the final fear isn't what has already been confirmed. It's what could be confirmed next. Insiders claim one more verification, one more person talking, one more record surfacing, one more detail slipping out could make secrecy impossible. And if that happens, it won't just reopen the scandal, it will cement the doubt. Because once identity becomes a royal crisis, the story never truly ends. Because in the end, the most shocking part isn't that Meghan collapsed, it's that the truth about Lilibet may have created a fracture the monarchy can't quietly heal. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.